Tonight on Free Minds TV, Jack Thompson has his panties in a bunch. We'll tell you why. Also, a courtesy cab service shut down in a small town in Illinois. We'll be giving you the rest of the story there. And the Downsizer Dispatch, plus a whole lot more. All coming up tonight on Free Minds TV.
And welcome to a brand new edition of Free Minds TV, where we challenge you, the viewer, to think outside the box. It is episode 130, and as always, it's Toby here with you.
And Nick.
We've got a ton of stories to get to. We will tell you why Jack Thompson's so upset. What's got this lawyer, this disbarred lawyer who's been going after video games and violent movies for quite a while down in Florida. Well, he's real upset. Someone made fun of him, and we'll probably make fun of him too and probably be next on his hit list, but we'll get to that in the second half of the show. First, I wanted to start off with a story that it blew my mind, Nick. It blew my mind because we are talking about sending people to jail for pretty much everything nowadays in this country. More and more stuff is becoming illegal. And one very sad story I wanted to point out today is a story about an old couple, Mr. and Mrs. Norris, an old couple, their grandparents, who were attempting to sell orchids out of their homes. While the orchids they were selling were perfectly legal, they had not filed the correct paperwork to sell them. And after a 6-month undercover investigation by the federal government, their door was kicked down, and SWAT teams dressed in all their camo and all their big guns and stuff burst down their door, ransacked their house, and hauled them off to jail. Yes, they were not selling anything that would harm anyone. They were not terrorists. They were simply trying to sell some orchids, and they had not filed the right paperwork. So the federal government decided to launch a 6-month investigation, bust down their door, and then send them to jail. Mr. Norris spent over 2 years in jail for the crime, and now he and his wife are speaking out about it and pleading with the federal government to stop making everything illegal. This is supposed to be the land of the free, yet you're sending people to jail for selling flowers without the proper paperwork. I mean, it's getting a little ridiculous. There are so many federal laws on the books, it would be impossible to read them. If you started immediately, start right now, you can continue reading the laws and you won't even catch up to the new laws that are being written every day, which you'll never get a chance to read in because you're reading all the old ones, let alone comprehending them. Way too many laws to ever read, yet they're passing more of them. Pretty much everything you do could be criminalized in some manner, or a conspiracy to create a crime. Nick, what do you think? Do you think it's time for the land of the free to start loosening up on what they're doing to their citizens?
Yeah, well, I wasn't aware that you did need to file certain kinds of paperwork to sell orchids in the United States.
Certain orchids,
But
Nick.
That's part of the problem, is that there are so many laws on the books, and most of them, especially at the federal level, are things that government should not be involved with at all. And certainly the federal government sticks its nose in a lot of areas that it doesn't have any constitutional justification for getting involved in. I mean, orchids, I don't think that there is any constitutional authority to regulate orchids.
Let's just say we don't care about these old people. We don't care about their human rights, their basic dignity to kick down their door, ransack it. Let's say these orchids really are dangerous. How much money would it be worth to spend on them? A 6-month undercover investigation, and then a whole SWAT team to ransack their house, trash their entire house looking for seeds, looking for any orchid paraphernalia. And orchids, they're not made to make drugs or anything. We're not talking about that here. They're just flowers. That's it. And the federal government is wasting how much money on them? It's just so ridiculous to me how big the federal government has gotten, and yet people still hail the American flag like it stands for freedom.
Yeah.
It's a crime to sell orchids without a proper permit.
Well, and politicians are still looking for more money. They're looking for more money and more control at every level of government, at the federal level, at the state level, and at the local level. So apparently it's not enough that they have laws that require people to fill out paperwork and get permits to sell certain kinds of flowers. You know, they want more control. And the next area that they might be targeting to regulate or, to prohibit certain things might be an area of interest to you. Maybe you don't grow orchids.
Or it could already be illegal. I mean, that's the problem, is there's so many millions of laws on the books, it would be impossible to actually understand them, yet ignorance of the law is no excuse. It's impossible to ever actually understand all the laws on the books and know them all. And so it's just a few people here and there that are getting picked off. That's what Mr. and Mrs. Norris are trying to warn people about and trying to testify with Congress, is that who knows what you're doing, whether it's a crime or not. They never had any idea what they were doing was illegal. They were just buying and selling flowers, and they went to prison for it. And so there's many things that you or I may be doing on a daily basis that is against the law, and you may be under a secret investigation, and you're not hurting anybody. No, there's no victim whatsoever, yet the federal government's going to waste their money going after just a few, not everybody, because they couldn't go after everyone, can't lock up everybody, but a few unfortunate poor souls will be picked off and their lives will be ruined. Anyways, we do need to move on, Nick. It's not only the federal government that's really cracking down and micromanaging people's lives. It also happens on the state and local level as well. And I think you've got a story that just points out how the government really screws up in helping people, and some good people trying to turn their lives around and help out people, make people safe. The government's just not letting them do that.
Yeah, and this story is coming from Quincy, Illinois, which is a small town. It's got a population of a little over 40,000 people.
That's a huge town for New Hampshire standards.
Yeah, but it is, but probably not for Illinois or anywhere else where a lot of people are probably watching. Jonathan Shawneckes changed his name, hoping people would forget about his setting fire to an abandoned school when he was a juvenile. He went to prison as an adult where he lost his eye in a fight. So obviously, this guy had kind of a rough patch in his life. But he was trying to turn it around and do something constructive to help society out. Jonathan said the loss of a friend in a drunk driving accident gave him the idea to start a service where maybe he could give people an option to avoid drinking and driving. Jonathan started courtesy rides on New Year's 2008, and he posted his number in bars. People called him and he picked them up, and he didn't actually charge for this service. It was a nonprofit service. However, he did accept donations. So people had the option of leaving a tip, leaving some money to cover the cost of gas and maybe some of his time in doing this. But it wasn't like they were expected to pay for this ride. Now, more than a year and a half after starting the service, the town where he started it has decided Jonathan needs to be regulated. Now, as far as the article is telling me here, Jonathan's the only guy in town who's offering a service like this. It's not a very big town, so one can assume he's probably the only guy doing this kind of a non-for-profit taxi service. The City Council of Quincy, Illinois, passed an ordinance by an 8-5 vote to tweak the taxi cab ordinance in the city code to classify his volunteer service as a for-hire business if he accepts donations. All of the charity he provided is now government regulated. Now, the simple way around this would be to apply to become a taxi driver, to get your taxi driver's license.
Pay all the money. In some places it can be hundreds of thousands of dollars even. Probably not as much here, though.
But it's more than that, because in the city code, apparently in Quincy, Illinois, they have a good citizen provision. So you have to be somebody in good standing to get your taxi license. Well, he obviously made some mistakes earlier in his life when he was a juvenile, and he went to jail later on in life.
So he couldn't even get the medallion and be a licensed.
He could not.
Even if he wanted to jump through the hoops and pay the government their blood money, he wouldn't even be allowed to. You know, Nick, it's such a sad case, and we've reported on other stories where the government cracks down on people just trying to help people out, just trying to give someone a ride home so they're not driving drunk, and the city cracks down and says no. And it's just so sad that it continues to happen over and over again. I read this article, and it says that the city had actually attempted a sting operation a few different times and sent undercover police officers onto courtesy rides to see if he was actually asking for money, because then they could have just booked him right there without having to go through all the city council rewording of the actual law and making it illegal for him to drive without his medallion, even though he's not an actual taxi service. Which taxi services, they're just people giving each other rides. Why do they need to jump through the government hoops to give people rides? In places like New York City, there's a limited amount of medallions, so you can't just become a taxi driver. And it costs thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars in some cases to get a medallion, because the state wants to regulate it. They want their blood money.
And it's not so much blood money. I mean, it's their bread and butter. But what I wanted to point out here is that the story here sort of shows where a lot of governments place their priority. What they're doing in this case is essentially the city government either for whatever reason didn't like this guy, or didn't like the fact that somebody was giving drunk people at bars rides home and wasn't paying some kind of a permit fee to the city. And if you talk to a lot of people in city government or in state government, they'll talk a lot about revenue generation, and that's a big goal for the city. So in this case, it seems that the city was willing to take this service off the streets, and as a story,
allow people to drive drunk.
We didn't get to the part of the story where it said that the for-profit taxi companies in town shut down at 1 a.m.
And the bars close at 1 a.m.
The bars close at 1 a.m. or 3 a.m. on weekends. So people
you can't
don't
even
have
get
the option
home.
of paying for a cab at
that's
that
just too
time
rich.
of night.
It goes figures. That's
So
what governments do.
yeah, I mean, the city government in this case appears to more inclined to shut down the service and try to get money out of this guy who can't get a medallion anyway, than to maybe allow the service to take place and not have so many drunk drivers on the streets.
Nick, you say it's not blood money, but how many people are going to get killed because the government wants their money because of drunk drivers driving because they have no other way to get home? That's why I say, yes, it is blood money in some cases because people are dying because of government regulations such as this. Anyways, we do need to move on. I wanted to go to a different part of the country where ABC 7 News is reporting that Kensington public parks are now going to be closed to children over the age of 5. Yes, ABC 7 News is reporting that children ages 5 and older will not be allowed in the park from 9 a.m. until 4 p.m. Monday through Friday. And you have to be a little one, and if you want to be at the park nowadays. No adults can be at the parks anymore just by themselves. You need to have a little kid with you, 5 years of age or younger. So, seems a little bit ridiculous. Why did they do this? Well, it's because a private not-for-profit school across the street was using the park during their recess, and the city got all flustered about that. They said this park is for tax-paying citizens only, and we're going to ban everybody now. Knee-jerk reaction, ban everybody from the park who's over 5 years old, except on weekends. Therefore, we ban this not-for-profit school, this private school, from using the park at recess. You know, even if they're not-for-profit school, Nick, they're still in the city where they're paying taxes for a public park that should be available to everyone who pays taxes on it. If you're paying taxes for a public park, shouldn't everybody get to use it?
One would think, but really it's not so much a public park as it is a city park. I mean, once the government is in charge of running the park, whatever park it is, people will talk about a public space. But the fact of the matter is, in practical terms, the city is the entity that decides who gets to use it and who doesn't. The idea that it's everybody's property doesn't really hold water. I
But
think
everybody's paying for it, Nick.
everybody's forced to pay for it.
Yeah, everybody's paying for it through taxes, and even the people at the private not-for-profit Brookwood School, they're still paying for it through taxes. Shouldn't they get to use it? They're paying for it, yet the government, the city council voted unanimously to ban everybody who's 5 years of age or older from the park during the week. Seems a little bit asinine to me, but there goes Kensington. I guess told by a listener, a viewer sent this in. They said that is the same town that banned Santa Claus in public places because it's offensive to people. Anyways, we do need to move along. Well, we can't really do anything about this unless you live in Kensington. Then you can probably throw out your foolish city councilors. What we can do is at least let the people at the federal government know, our so-called representatives know how we feel about certain issues. We try to do that with the Downsizer Dispatch every week. Nick, what is on tap this week?
Well, this week's Downsizer Dispatch raises an important point, and the message starts off that they haven't raised this point earlier because it seems a lot of people don't seem to care too much these days about what the Constitution requires of government, but I'm one of those people who does still think that matters, and I'm sure there's a lot of you out there who feel the same way. And many people, even though many people don't seem to care, drug control is not a constitutional power of the federal government. At the very most, the federal government could perhaps ban the importation of drugs and prohibit their sale across state lines under the Commerce Clause of the Constitution. But nowhere in the Constitution is Congress given the power to regulate what substances can be sold in a particular state, what substances you can put into your body. Those aren't decisions that the Congress of the United States or the DEA or any other federal agency can make. That's prohibited to the federal government. Of course, they went ahead and passed drug laws anyway without a constitutional constitutional amendment. But if you really think about it, if we don't need a constitutional amendment to prohibit drugs like marijuana, cocaine, heroin, then why did we need a constitutional amendment to ban alcohol at the federal level? Well, the fact of the matter is, it's not a constitutional power of the federal government. So what you can do about it is go to downsizedc.org and tell your representatives, elected officials in Washington that you would like them to vote for the Enumerated Powers Act, which would force Congress to cite what part of the Constitution justifies every piece of legislation that they pass. They have to point to some part of the Constitution and say what they think is there to justify that legislation that they're passing. The fact of the matter is, the majority of what the U.S. Congress passes these days, they're not things that the federal government of the United States is constitutionally permitted to deal with. So go to downsizedc.org and let your representatives know how you feel.
Yeah, and I would also suggest maybe pick up a Constitution. It's very short. It's a short read. It's not all that long. The Founding Fathers made it pretty clear.
They listed off the things that the Congress could do.
Right.
And
It's
they
to
said
limit-
everything else
Right.
is reserved to the states and the
10th Amendment.
people.
It's pretty simple, pretty clear. If you haven't read it yet, I suggest you do it. And then, wow, you're going to be either really angry, or I guess some people just think that if we went by the Constitution, it would be chaos. And it's such a scary world if we actually had to live up to this document. But hey,
It worked for the first 60,
And
70, 80 years
if
of
we
the
went
United
by the
States.
Constitution still, it would still be working. We wouldn't have this bloated government we have that's arresting people for freaking orchids. All right, let's move right along. When we come back, we are going to be letting you know why Jack Thompson is so upset and why he's suing a Facebook group for millions of dollars because they made fun of him, as well as New York City banning bake sales. We'll tell you why. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. This is Free Minds TV.
This is Glenn Jacobs, and you're watching Free Minds TV.
And welcome back to Free Minds TV. As always, it is Toby here with you.
And Nick,
We'd like to invite the viewers to log on to our website, freemindstv.com or freemindsmedia.org. However you want to get there, you can Google it. However it is, visit our website. From there, there's not only all the TV archives, but also the radio show, the blogs, ways to help the show, the members area, and a whole lot more up at freemindsmedia.org. All right, Nick, I do want to move right along because we've got a lot more to get to and not all that much time. I wanted to talk a little bit about Jack Thompson. And before we get into his latest quarrels here that he's having, his little temper tantrum, his hissy fit, let's just go over who he is real quick for people who don't know. I know his name sounded familiar at first for me, but I had to review. Oh yeah, he's the guy who went after violent video games and violent movies and wanted to ban all of them from, what was it altogether or just kids buying them? Or
I don't remember. He wanted
the
legislation
crusader.
enacted against violent video games and violent movies.
He was not very friendly to the First Amendment and
No.
freedom of speech, and he was actually disbarred. He went so crazy in some cases from the Florida Bar Association because he just couldn't handle himself.
Yeah, usually, I mean, you can get disbarred for, it doesn't necessarily mean you did anything illegal or unethical, but if the Bar Association...
You're acting like a crazy man, and that's what he
Well,
was doing.
if the Bar Association, basically, if the Bar Association does not like the way you practice law, then you can be disbarred. So, he was disbarred. I didn't like the message he was putting forth. I don't know why he was disbarred, the specific reason that was given, though. But Jack Thompson, the disbarred crusader against violent video games, has sued Facebook, alleging site users posted violent threats against him in a Facebook group called I Hate Jack Thompson. One post in particular was singled out and mentioned in the lawsuit, and we'll tell you how much he's suing for here in a second. The posting stated, Jack Thompson should be smacked across the face with an Atari 2600.
Yes.
Which is a threat of bodily harm, although it's a post on the Facebook page.
He should be
not very
metaphoric.
credible.
I will say this. He should be metaphorically slapped across the face with an Atari. What is it, 2600? Anyways, he should be metaphorically done it. I don't want to get sued here, too. I don't have any money for you, Jackie Jack. Sorry. But he should
I don't think
metaphorically
that,
be slapped across the face
I don't
with a
think that
video
this
game.
Facebook group has this much money either. According to the lawsuit, Thompson suffered emotional distress because of the postings. Emotional distress. He must have been very distressed here. And that the site content was not properly supervised. He is seeking $120 million in damages. Requests to remove the postings were faxed to Facebook CEO Max Zuckerberg, but He's received no response, according to this Bloomberg article. So $120 million in damages, although he is going after Facebook itself, not just the...
Of course, because they're
You go after the
probably
people with
not
the deep
monitoring,
pockets.
and they're not monitoring the
Well-
posts and the comments that are being left up there. Probably, I know that there's many people calling for legislation to be
Well-
passed so that the site, whoever owns the website, needs to be monitoring what comments users are submitting there.
Yeah, and the problem here is it's not that people don't make nasty comments online. Certainly they do. Technically, a lot of those threats could be construed as threatening or as liable if you were able to figure out who actually posted them. But to go after the operators of a website because they didn't monitor all of the posts that are on their website, and it's a massive
Facebook, it's millions
millions
a day.
of people. There's no way that they could monitor the
Millions
content.
a day.
So either they have to shut down people's ability to post content on the website, or they have no effective way to monitor it at all. It's not reasonable to expect that Facebook could do this if they wanted to, and I don't think that there should be any onus on them to be responsible for what people post.
Yeah,
and that doesn't just go for Facebook, that goes for any website.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly say before we move on to the next story, Jack Thompson, you're a loser for searching yourself on Facebook. I mean, there's only 1,400 people in this group, and there's only 1,400 people. It's not like this is a huge group he'd know about. He's probably out there looking for himself, seeing who's talking about him. He's out of the media ever since he got disbarred. Anyways, if you want more on Jack Thompson and feel happy about his poor plight, check it out. It'll be up on our show notes on the forums at freemindsmedia.org. All right, moving right along, Nick, I wanted to go over to New York City. This is the nanny state. There's lots of nanny states, but New York City is one of these ones that's really cracking down, making people healthy. If you're not going to take care of yourself, don't worry. The government's here to do it for you. And New York City is now banning the sale of cupcakes. That's right, no cupcakes, no chocolate, no cake, no carrot cake even, not even zucchini bread will be allowed to be sold at school bake sales to run money from everything from school clubs to sports teams to class field trips, everything else. No more bake sales because all the kids are too fat, they're too unhealthy, and as part of a push to make people healthier, the City of New York and the Department of Education in New York City is going to make it illegal for anyone to sell their cookies for a school event if it's going to raise money for any kind of a sports team or anything like that. Seems a little bit ridiculous to me. Of course, all this money is now either going to be pushed onto the taxpayers or they're going to have to cut things like extracurricular activities, sports, and all this other stuff that kids typically raised money for. Either that or the taxpayers will have to pay for it. Seemed like something that was once voluntary is either going to be pushed out completely or the taxpayers will have to pick up the bill. A little ridiculous, Nick, if you ask me.
Yeah, you can't have bake
Micromanaging
sales
people's lives.
either. I mean, not only did the bake sales raise money, but you got to buy brownies and things.
No, but that's bad, Nick. You can't have people just buying brownies. You got to regulate it.
Well, they might ban. They'll probably go further with this. I mean, New York City has
Well, they
gone a long
did
way.
go a little bit further. They also have limits on what can be sold in school vending machines, of course. This is going along with this legislation, and it's a big paper. There's all sorts of bans
Maybe
here.
they should just make it illegal for children to eat sweet foods.
Well, it's true.
fatty
The
foods.
New York, there's not only in New York, but across the nation, there's a bunch of slobodons, a bunch of fatties. But is it the government's job to take care of
Well,
them?
it's
I mean, it
probably
seems
parents'
like
job.
it's not the government's
And once
job.
kids get over, say, 12 years of age, they should probably start taking some responsibility for what they eat. I mean, nobody really well, maybe somebody did.
How
Most
about
people
this?
don't
How
want to
about
be
this?
overweight.
Give them more recess back because schools across the United States are taking away recess, the ability to run around. You have schools actually banning running on the playground in fear of a kid might trip and hurt himself. Walking's a much safer alternative to running, Nick. How about you give them recess back, get them active again, rather than banning bake sales? God, yeah, Nick.
I didn't think they were going to outlaw bake sales. That wasn't. I didn't see it.
Yeah,
coming.
and I don't want to misconstrue this. If you're just someone who wants to have a bake sale, you can have a bake sale. Just can't be giving any of that money to any kind of a school club or a sports team or anything school related. You don't want to make the fatties any fatter. Anyways, it's for the good of the children.
Like
Nick.
people aren't going to be overweight because that's what people do. Is they get fat because they eat what's sold at a school bake sale. That's what makes people fat. What effect is this actually going to have? I don't think we're going to see children losing weight
No,
all
you know
over
what
New
we're going
York
to see?
City.
We're going to see funding for sports teams cuts. Therefore, the kids aren't going to be able to join a sports team and run around,
It's
and the kids are
mostly-
going to be even fatter.
It's
This is
mostly-
going to have a reverse effect, Nick.
It's mostly sports teams that do. I mean, there are some other clubs that do it, but sports teams are a big chunk of the organizations, the clubs that are doing these bake sales.
But see, Nick, they're not eating the brownies themselves. If the sports people were eating the brownies, it would be okay, but they're feeding it to the fatties who don't even want to do the sports team. So that's why the government's got to crack down. Anyways, enough ranting on this. It's time to move along, because you've got a story about squatters' rights and a poor couple who lost most of it anyways because they weren't paying enough attention to their own land.
Well, you can call them squatters' rights, or you can call it by the technical term adverse possession. But if you own a piece of property, it is a good idea to know what's going on there, as this case will highlight. A woman and her husband purchased a large parcel of land a few miles away from their home as an investment, and they sort of forgot about it. Meanwhile, a neighbor to the land used it for 21 years, which is important, and then claimed ownership using the old squatters' rights law in Pennsylvania. We purchased it in the 1970s as an investment, the woman said. We paid taxes on it every year, but never looked at it. We thought, who's going to steal it? It's land. You can't really steal it. You can't make off with it. But when the couple decided to sell the parcel to raise money for their 4 children, they discovered that somebody had taken possession of it. We had a buyer, so we hired a surveyor, she said. That's how we found out about it. When we hired the surveyor, we got served with papers that the neighbors had filed a claim. Then the lawyers for both sides started to negotiate, and the result ended up being that the neighbors, the people who didn't originally buy the land, they just claimed possession of it, got 55%. The lawyer and for the couple got 25%, and the couple that originally purchased this land in the 70s got 20%.
Sounds
And
like
they could have
private
gone,
property rights right there, and I
Well-
know they could have gone to all these other trials.
they could have gone to trial, but then they
There's-
could have lost land entirely.
You know-
And this is an archaic law. This law was put in place when Pennsylvania was still a frontier. If there was a plot of land that somebody claimed, but they never went back there, well, the idea was it's frontier. We're not going to let the land go to waste. And this is, in most places around the country, this is how it works.
Still? You mean I
Still,
could just go
here
to an
in New
abandoned
Hampshire.
piece of land and start squatting on it, set up shop?
Well, it also works the same way if there's a right-of-way. If there's an old logging road over a property and you use it for 21 years and the neighbor never stops you, then you essentially establish a claim to have a
Wow.
right-of-way over that land, even if you never paid for it.
Only in America, Nick. Land of the free, where property rights mean everything. And wow, seems like these people should be shot for trespassing, if you ask me. But anyways, that's just me. I
Well,
believe in property
you
rights.
can, if you tell them to get off at some point within that 21-year period, then the clock starts over again.
What on 20?
You have to. You
years
do
and
have.
366
and we don't have
days?
enough time to get into it, but I would say that to some extent, I think that people should have to assert their claim to a piece of land to some extent. I mean, they could have avoided this whole thing by putting up no trespassing signs, and that would have covered them.
Yeah. Well, what are you gonna do? To me, I think it could be different, but it's just a word to the wise: be careful. Know who's on your land. Anyways, we're out of time. That's going to do it for us. Visit freemindsmedia.org for everything else. In the meantime, we'll be back this Sunday with an all-new radio show. Next week with an all-new edition of Free Minds TV. It's been Toby here with you.
And Nick.
Have a good one.